In the silent backstage of the human mind, a constant battle takes place. But few have the courage to face it head-on. It is not an external conflict, nor a visible drama. It is an internal struggle, subtle, almost imperceptible, fought between what the individual dreams of being and what they actually do. In a world obsessed with self-image, performance, and idealizations, fantasy has become the most consumed psychic drug of modernity. It is an invisible addiction, leaving no physical traces, but slowly corroding the capacity for action. Jean-Paul Sartre was one of the first thinkers to identify this phenomenon with brutal clarity. The human tendency to take refuge in mental idealizations as a way to avoid the concrete responsibility of existing. For Sartre, this behavior is a sophisticated form of self-deception that he called bad faith. The ability of human beings to pretend to themselves that they are something they are not, or to ignore their own freedom to escape the weight of their choices. And it is precisely at this point that fantasy takes on a central role. It becomes an illusory shelter against the anguish of being free. The individual, instead of acting, dreams. Instead of facing the imperfection of the real world, they project idealized versions of success, courage, love, and fulfillment. But all of this occurs within the mind, where there is no risk, rejection, or failure. It is as if there were a parallel existence, where everything works exactly as desired. A place where the individual is everything they have yet to become, but believe they could be one day. Yet that day never comes. Action is eternally postponed in the name of perpetual planning, and the subject remains stagnant, trapped in the illusion that thinking, planning, and imagining is the same as walking. But as Sartre shows us, there is nothing more dangerous than confusing fantasy with progress. In this video, we will explore how this silent psychological mechanism traps millions of people, preventing them from living an authentic life. We will analyze Sartre's thesis that human beings are condemned to freedom, which means there are no metaphysical excuses, no destiny, no chance, only choices. And we will see why, to escape the anguish of this freedom, many prefer to live in a mental world where everything is under control, even though, paradoxically, nothing is real. The proposal here is not to comfort. On the contrary, this video will surgically deconstruct the escape mechanisms that you may have never noticed, but that are sabotaging your real existence. After all, while your mind keeps you busy with idealized versions of your life, time continues its course, and the real world keeps waiting for your action. The question that remains is, until when? The human mind possesses an extraordinary ability to imagine. It is this capacity that allows us to create worlds, project futures, and dream of what does not yet exist. But what should be a tool for creation and transformation has become, for many, a seductive trap. Fantasy today occupies the place that once belonged to religious faith, collective purpose, or even direct confrontation with reality. It has become an emotional refuge, a psychological crutch, a perfectly accepted and even encouraged drug in a culture that values appearance more than effort, projection more than confrontation, and ideal more than real. Jean-Paul Sartre, in Being and Nothingness, accurately describes the functioning of this trap. He explains that imagination has the power to unrealize the world. In other words, when we imagine something, we are, in a way, denying what is, the world as it truly is, to project what we wish it were. This denial is a form of escape, and the more intense the anguish in the face of concrete reality, the more seductive the illusion becomes. Fantasy begins to be used not as a rehearsal for action, but as a substitute for action. The person does not imagine to act. They imagine to avoid having to act. This dynamic explains why so many individuals today live disconnected from their own bodies. their circumstances, and their real projects. Instead of putting their feet on the ground and dealing with the frustration, rejection, and imperfection of concrete life, they prefer to mentally inhabit scenarios where everything happens as they wish. These are lives lived inside the head, controlled, clean, predictable, and completely innocuous. There is no real growth because there is no friction. There is no evolution because there is no confrontation with the unpredictable. There is no experience because there is no presence. This substitution of real life for imaginary life is addictive because it offers an instant reward, the pleasure of feeling accomplished, even if only in thought. And like any drug, it is seductive, anesthetizing, and, in the long run, destructive. The person who lives in fantasy loses the ability to tolerate frustration, to sustain doubt, to take risks. They become dependent on mental comfort and averse to reality. They no longer seek to change the world, only to reinvent it mentally, like a screenwriter of private fictions. Sartre saw this behavior as a profound denial of freedom, because by imagining an ideal life instead of building it, the subject is refusing their radical responsibility to act in the world. They choose, even if unconsciously, paralysis cloaked in delusion. Fantasy, in this sense, is not harmless. It is a form of slow death, a sophisticated alienation that traps the individual in a comfortable bubble of unreality. And it is precisely at this point that the most devastating concept of Sartrean philosophy emerges: bad faith. A psychological state where the subject knows, on some level, that they are fleeing from themselves, but chooses to continue fleeing. In the next segment, we will dive deeply into this idea: the art of pretending to progress while being stationary. Prepare for a direct and uncomfortable exposure of the most sophisticated lie you have ever told yourself. If this content is making sense to you, click the subscribe button and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for your support. Among all the concepts of Sartre's existentialist philosophy, perhaps none is as revealing and at the same time as devastating as the idea of bad faith. Bad faith is not just a lie told to others, but a lie directed at oneself. It is a subtle and sophisticated psychological process in which the individual chooses to deceive themselves, creates justifications for their own stagnation, and constructs narratives that give the impression of movement when, in reality, there is no action at all. It is a form of self-deception in which the subject acts as if they are simultaneously free and determined, oscillating between roles to avoid confronting their radical responsibility. Sartre describes bad faith as the capacity of consciousness to split into two: one part that knows the truth and another that chooses to ignore it. It is as if the mind plays an endless game of hide-and-seek with itself. For example, someone who dreams of being a writer may spend years planning stories, imagining dialogues, visualizing published books, but never writes a line. In their mind, this person believes they are getting closer to their goal because they are constantly preparing. But in reality, they remain stuck in the same place. The dream becomes an alibi, and the imagination an elaborate excuse for inaction. Another example is the individual who fantasizes about perfect relationships. They create mental images of deep, romantic, and unshakable bonds, but when the opportunity arises to open up to another, they pull back. They avoid vulnerability, flee from emotional exposure, refuse to take the risk of rejection. Thus, they preserve the idealized image of love in their mind, but sacrifice the concrete experience of real intimacy. Sartre would call this individual someone living in bad faith, someone who pretends to seek something but secretly does everything to avoid the reality of that something. Bad faith is, in essence, a defense mechanism against the anguish of freedom. Because being free is not a comfortable gift, it is a condemnation. To be free means having no excuses, not being able to outsource responsibility, not being able to blame fate or chance. And in the face of this weight, the mind finds an escape in bad faith. The person can continue telling themselves that they are not ready yet, that they need to wait for the right moment, that one day the conditions will be perfect. This internal discourse is not the result of ignorance, but of conscious self-deception. It is a masked escape of rationality. The consequence is brutal. The individual becomes accustomed to living in the illusion of being in motion. They plan without acting, dream without risking, project without realizing. Life transforms into an eternal rehearsal without a premiere. The stage is set, the lines memorized. The imaginary audience applauds in the mind. But the play never happens. This is the essence of bad faith, confusing desire with fulfillment, plan with act, illusion with existence. And here we arrive at an even deeper paradox. Bad faith not only paralyzes us, but seduces us. Because it offers comfort, it frees us from the direct confrontation with failure, with imperfection, with rejection. But this comfort is a deadly trap, a prison disguised as paradise. This is exactly what we will discuss in the next part. Why comfort is a prison with beautiful decor, and how it keeps you trapped without you realizing it. Nothing is more seductive to human beings than the promise of security. From an early age, we are taught to seek comfort, the softest chair, the most stable job, the predictable routine that gives us the feeling that we control our destiny. But as Sartre warned, this insatiable desire for security is often what condemns us to a stagnant existence. Comfort is not just a pleasant condition, it can become an invisible prison, carefully decorated with illusions of stability and happiness, but which suffocates the authenticity of life. When a person chooses to remain in the cozy space of their fantasies, they eliminate the risk of failure, but they also eliminate the possibility of fulfillment. In the mental world, every step is calculated, every outcome is perfect, every detail can be controlled. There are no surprises, no rejection, no pain. This feeling is deeply addictive because it protects the individual from what they fear most, the unpredictability of existence. However, it is precisely this unpredictability that gives life its intensity and transformative character. The danger is that comfort disguises itself as freedom. The person believes they are living as they wish, because they feel good staying in the realm of imagination or predictable routine. But this feeling is illusory. What really happens is that they have traded the uncertain vastness of freedom for the safe confinement of a reduced space. Within this gilded prison, nothing threatens, but nothing grows. The subject convinces themselves that they are protected, when in fact they are trapped. Sartre saw this choice as an active refusal of freedom. The human being, condemned to be free, cannot escape the weight of their choices. Thus, when they opt for absolute comfort, they are, in practice, choosing paralysis. This paralysis does not manifest dramatically, but silently. Years pass without taking significant risks. Projects remain only on paper. Relationships never deepen. Ideas never leave the daydream phase. Life, in this state, continues to exist biologically, but it is not lived authentically. And it is here that the paradox becomes unbearable. The same space that offers security reveals itself, at its core, to be suffocating. The beautiful decor of this prison is made of justifications. I am waiting for the right moment. It is not safe to take risks now. One day, I will try. These are phrases that create a sense of order, but hide the raw truth, the fear of fully existing. The more time passes, the more the subject convinces themselves that it is already too late, and this prison becomes permanent, until there is no energy left to escape it. This is the cost of living in comfort. A life without intensity, without authenticity, without risk. A life that deep down never happened. But Sartre did not stop there. He went even further by stating that no matter how much we try to deny it, there is no escape from freedom. We are condemned to choose, and even the refusal to choose is a choice. This is the most brutal truth of existentialist philosophy. Human beings are condemned to freedom. This is exactly the theme of the next part. For Jean-Paul Sartre, freedom is not a generous gift from the universe. It is not an optional choice that the individual can accept or refuse according to their convenience. It is an inescapable condition of existence. Man is condemned to be free, Sartre wrote in Being and Nothingness, and this sentence sounds almost like a curse. Why? Because along with freedom comes the unbreakable burden of responsibility. Human beings cannot hide behind gods, written destinies, fixed natures, or comfortable excuses. Every act, every silence, every omission is a stance towards life, and this stance falls exclusively on the individual. This idea destroys one of the most persistent illusions of the human condition, that it is possible to transfer the responsibility of our choices. Sartre categorically rejects the notion that we are merely products of our environment, circumstances, or external pressures. Of course, there are limits. Our facticity, as he called it, that is, the concrete condition of being thrown into the world with a body, a time, a historical context. But within those limits, freedom is absolute. We cannot choose to be born, but we can choose what to do with what we have received. We cannot avoid the weight of existence, but we can decide how to carry it. This radical freedom is not comfortable. It throws us directly into the experience of existential anguish. Anguish, for Sartre, is not the fear of something specific, but the vertigo in the face of the awareness that there is nothing that predetermines what we should be. Faced with an abyss of possibilities, we feel the weight that each choice is definitive because it defines who we are. This is the true origin of existential anxiety, not the lack of options, but the excess of them. Every step we take excludes infinitely many other possibilities, and we are forced to bear the consequences of that. The bad news, therefore, is that there is no escape route. Even the attempt not to choose is already a choice. The subject who says, "I will wait for the perfect conditions to act," has already chosen. They have chosen paralysis. The one who claims, "I have no control over my destiny," has already decided to abdicate their freedom, but this act itself is an expression of freedom. There is no way to escape the weight of responsibility. This is the essence of what Sartre calls condemnation. We did not ask to be free, but we are. And there is no court or external force capable of overturning this verdict. The psychological impact of this realization is profound. For many, it is unbearable to face that there is no excuse sufficient to justify a wasted life. There is no, "I didn't have the opportunity, it wasn't my time, it wasn't written." What exists is choice, and the refusal to take that choice. Freedom is so radical that it disarms us, and that is why so many prefer to take refuge in fantasy or comfort. But Sartre reminds us that this escape does not eliminate freedom. It only transforms it into bad faith. Here arises an inevitable question. If we are condemned to freedom, if there is no ready manual, no right moment, no predetermined destiny, then what to do? Sartre's answer is harsh but liberating. Act, even imperfectly, even without guarantees, even without feeling ready. Because it is only in the act, in the real movement, that life is realized. This is exactly what we will talk about next. The courage to act without being ready, and how the imperfect leap is the only form of authentic existence. If what you're hearing resonates with you, you'll find real value in my ebooks. Beyond the Shadow breaks down Jung's core ideas, while Dialogues with the Unconscious gives you a 30-day path to apply them in your life. Both are linked in the pinned comment. One of the greatest illusions cultivated by human beings is the idea that one day the perfect moment will arrive. This imaginary moment would be when everything aligns: complete confidence, sufficient resources, absence of risks, absolute clarity of the path ahead. This fantasy is seductive because it promises to eliminate uncertainty even before life begins to happen. But, as Sartre demonstrated, that moment never comes. Waiting to be ready is just another form of bad faith, an indefinite postponement that keeps the subject in the comfort of illusion but prevents them from living authentically. The truth is brutal. No one is ever completely prepared to live. Major decisions, changing careers, starting a relationship, creating a work of art, taking a stand in the world, always carry with them a risk, a shadow of failure, the real possibility of rejection or imperfection. But it is precisely in that risk that life is found. Authenticity does not arise from certainty, but from the leap. It is in the imperfect act, in the bold and awkward movement, that existence materializes. Sartre insisted that freedom only makes sense at the moment it transforms into action. Thinking about acting is not acting. Planning, mentally rehearsing, imagining the outcomes, none of this is real existence. Only at the moment the decision is embodied in the body, in gestures, and in the world does the individual break the barrier of fantasy and enter the realm of the authentic. This is the fundamental difference. The idealized life is static, while the lived life is dynamic, unpredictable, and irreversible. Of course, this process is distressing. Making decisions without guarantees means accepting that we can fail. It means understanding that each step is a calculated risk in the dark. But paradoxically, it is only through this imperfection that we experience the intensity of being alive. The artist who paints, knowing that their work may be rejected, lives more authentically than one who spends years imagining the perfect painting. The individual who loves, even at the risk of rejection, experiences more of life than one who dreams of ideal relationships, but avoids any real vulnerability. Courage, therefore, is not in eliminating fear, but in acting despite it. Those who wait to feel secure before acting are doomed to wait forever. Those who act, even in the face of uncertainty, connect with what Sartre called being for itself, an existence defined in the present through choices and not in projected images for the future. Life does not happen in theory, but in the clash with reality. And in that clash, we find both our limitations and our true potential. This is why Sartrean philosophy is so challenging. It takes away any excuse. There is no written destiny, no instruction manual, no perfect moment. There is only raw and naked freedom and the demand to use it now. This means that each of us is always faced with a radical choice: to remain safe within the gilded walls of imagination, or to throw ourselves into the real world with all its imperfection and uncertainty. And here we reach the final point of this journey, the realization that authentic life does not happen within the mind, but in the imperfect movement of action. In the next segment, we will conclude by showing how life only truly begins when fantasy ends, and why, despite being painful, this is the liberation that gives meaning to existence. We have reached the crucial point of Sartrean reflection. Real life does not happen inside the head, in the comfortable narratives that the individual constructs for themselves, but in the imperfect friction of action. Fantasy can be a creative space. It can even serve as psychological preparation for what is to come. But when it becomes a substitute for reality, it ceases to be an ally and transforms into a prison. It is easy to understand why so many remain trapped in this state. In the mind, there are no failures, no rejection, no pain. There, everything is controllable, predictable, and perfect. But the price of mental perfection is the sterility of existence. While life flows outside, the dreamer remains isolated, cultivating illusions that never incarnate in the world. Sartre confronts us with a truth that deeply unsettles. There is no escaping freedom. And if there is no escape, there is also no justification for living only in dreams. Human beings were not made to remain closed off in daydreams. They were made to plunge into the risk of the real, even if that means facing imperfection and uncertainty. Courage, in this sense, is not the absence of fear, but the decision to walk amid fear, to choose even when there are no guarantees. It is in this gesture that existence gains density. It is in this act that life ceases to be a promise and becomes a reality. To live authentically is to accept that the world will never be as perfect as the idealized scenarios in the mind. It is to understand that rejection can happen, that failure is a concrete possibility, that pain is inevitable. But paradoxically, it is in this imperfect field that we find meaning. Life gains value precisely because it is not under our absolute control. Every choice is risky, every step is definitive, and it is in this irreversibility that we discover who we really are. Sartre's philosophy was not built to console, but to shake. It does not offer refuge, but a radical call to responsibility. The invitation is not to keep dreaming, but to live. Because in the end, all the distance between who you are and who you could be can only be traversed through concrete action. Fantasies will remain seductive, but every minute spent in them is a minute stolen from your own life. Now, it is up to you to ask yourself, are you willing to give up the illusory perfection and embrace the imperfection of real existence? Are you prepared to recognize that there will never be an absolutely right moment to act, and that the only way to live is to start, here and now, even if stumbling, even if failing, even if feeling afraid? This is the crossroads faced by every human being, to continue in the comfort of imagination or to dive into the risk of the real. If this video has awakened something in you, leave in the comments how fantasy has influenced your life. Do you feel you are living or just dreaming? Your reflection can help others who are trapped in the same dilemma. And don't forget, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and share this content with those who need to hear this message. And above all, keep watching the next video because the journey does not end here. What comes next is equally important to deepen this journey.